So, how do you help people become more emotionally intelligent? Right? How do you get the guy on your team to stop talking over everyone in meetings, or get someone else in that same meeting comfortable enough that they can promote their great idea, or help someone show empathy, or step back and take a breath before they say something that they'll regret. So these, there's are really, really tough changes to help someone make. Valuable, but really tough. And so what I want to describe here is a study that we did with a little over 6,000 learners over 2 years, trying to help them do just that. And we did it over multiple iterations. And we took this work on because we work with a large network of consultants and coaches who work with organizations to help them develop their workforces. And we were continually hearing from them that these were the type of issues that a lot of their clients were struggling with. And so the experience that we eventually ended up creating for this study, it was about 4 hours long. And what I'll do is I'll break it into three phases, three problems that we knew from the beginning that we had to solve. All right, so one, we needed to get people invested in their EQ development because it's not something that you normally think about, right? We get invested in things like, well, I want to start eating healthier, right? I want to lose weight. I want to spend more time with my family or my dog, or I should figure out where my cat is, right? But we don't commit to EQ development, even though it can dramatically improve our happiness and our ability to meet our goals. Okay, two, we also needed to help them figure out where they needed to improve, right? Usually that is not obvious to us. And then three, we needed to help them act on those insights, right? And so like each one of these is progressively harder than the last. And so our task was, how do you do that? So, all right, so the first one is, how do we really engage people, get their buy-in? Because developing my emotional intelligence, like that's going to take a lot of effort from me, right? I need to be really committed and bought into that goal, right? I have to own it. And one of the ways that we have discovered over the years to do this really effectively, ironically, is to start with what people are really good at, where they shine. We all love basking in that. I do, right? Especially things that I may not have traditionally thought of as a strength before, like making people feel heard, or speaking up about problems, or filling awkward silences, right? Even if I was the one who created that awkward silence. And so we started with a discussion of people's EQ strengths. And not just a list of their strengths, 1, 2, 3, but a deeper level discussion of where that comes from inside of them. So for instance, my wife, and I'm going to be using her as a running example throughout this, she said I could. She is really good at staying objective. She is really good at remaining resolute when she is pressured, and really good at standing her ground in a situation. Like, for instance, if she wanted a dog and the person she was married to didn't, right? She is really good at being self-assured, asserting for her opinions and rights, right? The dog picked up on this immediately, right? Well, where does this come from? What's the source of these strengths? Well, she, in particular, she's got a really strong psychological need to have competency in her life. Number one, she needs to be competent, but also the people she's working with need to be competent. She needs things to be accurate. She needs to be self-reliant. And then even a little deeper, she needs to guard her dignity, not expose herself in a way that might make her look foolish or incompetent or weak. Now, we all have these needs at some level, but they're particularly strong with her. Like, I don't personally feel these needs at the same level, right? Anywhere near it, right? I've got my own list of psychological needs that my own issues that I need to take care of, right? For instance, I'm the primary caretaker of a dog now. But once you lay these things out there like this for a person, the connections just pop in their heads. you got them. They see why they act the way they do, and in a way that has really never occurred to them before, that aha moment. And they start to really get in a new way how consequential their behavior is and how important this EQ stuff is. And despite what we sometimes naturally assume, almost everyone has some sort of emotional intelligence. Even those people who you think of as being completely socially incompetent, right? And I'm not talking about people who they don't know which fork goes with which part of the meal, right? I'm talking about those people who you're not even sure they should be allowed to have a fork, right? But even for those folks, their brain has not abandoned its responsibility to help them deal with emotional and social situations. It's just that brain is better at certain parts of emotional intelligence than others. And it may not be the aspects of emotional intelligence that our culture tends to shine its spotlight on, right? Like being poised or charismatic or a good mingler, right? That's what we often think of when we think of an emotionally intelligent person. But that person's form of EQ is nonetheless crucial to helping that person navigate their particular social and emotional landscape, how they see the world, what's important to them. And so this is the model that we used in the program to help people understand their EQ strengths and challenges. It's a personality model called DiSC. So really briefly, I'll talk about the 4 quadrants here. So you can think about people who they're really direct, assertive, sometimes even forceful, D or dominance. The aspects of emotional intelligence that come really naturally to these folks is often being really resolute, standing their ground, being self-assured, asserting themselves, being dynamic, capturing people's attention, persuading. Okay, you probably know people with an I or influencing style, really social and high energy and enthusiastic. Right? They are also really good at slipping into that dynamic mindset, right? Because the conga line, it is not going to start itself. Also, they function really well in situations that call for an outgoing mindset or ones that call for an empathetic mindset. Okay, down here, the S or settiness style, which is accommodating and patient and gentle, right? That's where I fall, right? I'm pretty sure that's where Socks falls. So people here, they're also naturally really good at being empathetic, but as well, great in situations that call for someone to be receptive, to really listen. And then situations that require someone to remain composed, stay calm, not lose their temper. And then finally, folks in the C or conscientiousness style. They're analytical and reserved and precise. Folks who they really know how to enjoy some good alone time. So as you can imagine, they're also really good at this compose thing, but as well, naturally good at those situations that call for an objective mindset, separating their emotions from facts, noticing when personal relationships are interfering with their judgment or when they're interfering with their ability to make a good decision or interfering with their ability to take a good nap, right? Nothing kills a good nap like a personal relationship. And also the resolute mindset, standing firm. In fact, my wife that I talked about a minute ago, she falls right here, CD, right? She's naturally really good at being objective, resolute, and self-assured. So in the classroom experience, we incorporated an assessment that measures a person's personality in this model, as well as a self-assessment of which mindsets around the circle here come most and least naturally to them. So this whole celebration of strengths that I've been talking about, which was done largely through small and large group discussion, it was not just a great way to get people invested, but it also introduced the model in a personalized way and helped them really appreciate just how important their emotional intelligence has been throughout their lives. All right, because so the second big challenge we had with learners, and again, as we progress, these are getting more and more difficult. The second was, how do we help them figure out what to improve? Raise awareness of those mindsets that are outside of their comfort zone and get them to see those mindsets as truly valuable, because the mindsets inside their comfort zone, well, this is my wife again. Those mindsets inside their comfort zone, they're there for a reason. Those mindsets directly reflect her deeper needs and priorities, like being competent and being accurate and being self-sufficient. And the ones outside, right, not only do those not reflect those needs and priorities, oftentimes they're in direct opposition to it. So for example, being empathetic over here means making yourself open to tender emotions with another person, being vulnerable. Well, that's a threat to self-sufficiency. That's a threat to accurate, logical, objective, impersonal decision-making. It's a threat to not looking weak. And actually, we did a kind of an interesting study, a different study, a couple of years back, where we had a bunch of learners take a personality assessment, and then we gave them learning modules that they could use to independently explore different topics. And so some of these topics were on their strengths, and some of them were on their challenges. So guess which ones people spent the most time on? Well, interestingly, people said after the fact that they spent the most time on their challenges. But what they actually did, because we can look at their usage and see, is no, in fact, they spent the most time on their strengths. Those are the things that made sense to them. A lot of you have probably heard of the books Grit and Quiet. Grit is, it's a book about the power of perseverance and drive and passion and how to harness it. Quiet is about the power of introversion, the value of silence and solitude. Who do you think read which book? Because that low-key, reserved person, but they could probably really have their eyes opened by reading Grit. And that results-oriented, driven person, they could probably really have their eyes opened by reading Quiet. But I'm going to bet that most readers of these books are probably just reinforcing their own natural dispositions. So how do you overcome this very natural tendency? Well, we talked to learners and facilitators after the session, and what we found is that the two most powerful things here were the video examples and small group discussions. So let me talk about the videos first. What we ended up devising is having the group watch a video of a character who's struggling with a situation. And there's a variety of these different videos, but let me take one in particular. It's of Stephanie, and she's got an I style, and this is her coworker, Tom. And so Tom's asking her to help him over the weekend again. And, you kind of get the sense watching the video, like Tom has trouble getting through most weekends on his own. But this particular weekend, Stephanie's mother is coming into town. And so you hear her internal monologue in the moment, and you can just see how tempting it is for her to say, you know what, sure, I'll do it, no worries. Because she sees how stressed he is. She can just really feel the tension radiating off of him. And she's a compassionate person with this really strong internal drive to help people. And she's got it within her power to make all of that tension go away just by saying yes, even though it's not the healthy choice. So the group gets to talk about what's going on with her and why it is so hard for her to do the healthy thing. All right, and then they get to select, with these videos, 2 healthy choices, 2 different video clips that represent different approaches to handling the situation. One using the self-assured mindset, and then one using the objective. And the group can see a concrete example here of what pushing yourself outside your comfort zone, what difference that makes. And that's what we're teaching here, is agility, is being able to push yourself to make the healthy choice, even when it's not the comfortable choice, sizing up a situation and choosing the most appropriate mindset. Okay, so then here we're at the point where we're having them choose one area where they want to work on. And we have their assessment results, so we know where they scored the lowest. But people are going to be their own best judges of what makes sense right now in their world. And maybe the thing that they actually need to work on, the thing that will actually help them most, well, maybe it scares them too much. Maybe, it's too outside their comfort zone. And, if you tell them, hey, this is what you're going to work on, that's going to die the second they leave the classroom. But the good news is there are always multiple areas that we can work on. So we give them their assessment results, and people were given an effort meter here for each of the mindsets, telling them how much effort it might take for them. So my wife, moving into the outgoing mindset, lots of effort for her to do this, right? I'm the same. We are collectively super good at getting out of social obligations. And so we talk her through how this mindset or that mindset would help her. But ultimately, it's about letting her choose what would help her most right now. And the learners then get together with a partner and they talk through why they chose what they did and how they see that helping them in real life. This really kind of helps them internalize the commitment that they're making. All right, and then, of course, the final phase we had to figure out, and probably the most difficult one, is how do you move that into action? How do you get people to break their really well-worn patterns? And we played with this twofold approach. And so if you're familiar with cognitive behavioral interventions, there is an element in these that is focused on helping people directly shift their behavior. But there's also an element that's focused on helping them shift their thought patterns. Because most of the time, it's these habitual, automatic thoughts that are driving this repeated unhealthy behavior. They are what is making the person in the moment think that this is a good idea. Like yeah, department meetings, they are a good time to show people how flexible I am, right? Even though no one else is having that thought. And so we start by working with the person to help them understand what thoughts are going to pop into their head when they get into a given situation. And this is something that normally you'd work with a therapist, right, to help the individual work through. But because we know something about their personality, and because we know what aspect of emotional intelligence that they're working on, we can actually really take some targeted guesses at these internal monologues to the point where we get participants telling us like, wow, like that's creepy. Like, how did you know what's going through my head? And so, if you're like a really hard charging, driven person and you're trying to be more empathetic, when you get in that situation, it's very likely you're going to have thoughts like, I don't have time to sit here and listen to this, right? I shouldn't have to coddle people, right? Suck it up. Or I know exactly what I would do in your place, right? Instead of being empathetic, right? These things automatically popping in there. And those thoughts, they're going to be dragging you back into your comfort zone over here. That's very normal. Everybody gets that. But to grow, you're going to need to be able to first recognize the thoughts when they're happening. But two, be able to set them aside and to say, you know what, that is my old wiring. Just because I'm having a certain thought, it doesn't mean I have to obey it. I'm in charge here, not my unconscious. Okay. And then there is the behavioral part that we work with them on. And so we incorporate a role play, although we don't call it that because there is a lot of aversion to role play out there, as you may know. But the research, it absolutely shows that practicing this type of concrete problem solving in a session is probably one of the best things that you can do to prepare people to use that material in real life. But in addition to that role play, we also wanted to get really, really specific about what they're going to do in the coming weeks, what concrete behaviors they're going to do. And the problem that we ran into here in the early testings is that People are in vastly different places about what is comfortable or appropriate for them as a first step. Even if we've got two people, let's say they're both super strong DI styles and they're both working on being composed, still this one size fits all suggestion, they're not going to fit all because these people are probably in very different places in their struggle. One person's stretch goal might be to keep the contempt on their face from showing, right? And the other person's stretch goal might be to keep from making growling noises. And if you try that force fit, they're just going to forget when they leave the classroom. On the other hand, if the guidance is too broad, it's not going to be concrete enough. It's just going to wash over them and be forgotten within an hour. And so we decided that it was really about choice and giving people options. Okay, so this is me here. I've got that patient accommodating S style. I'm working on the self-assured mindset, right? I want to be able to tell people when I have enough dogs. You can see how much effort that takes for me. And I've got a bunch of options for next steps here that have all been tailored to my S style, going from easiest to hardest. Because if you take someone who's a weak swimmer, for example, and you take them to the deep end and you say, jump in, they're not going to drown. They're just not going to get in the water. You've got to meet them where they're at. And the learner is really the best judge of that. So this one here about addressing interpersonal problems more proactively, boy, that sounds like a lot more energy than I'm willing to commit right now in my life. But this one here about monitoring my language choices when I'm talking, not giving away my power in the conversation, well, yeah, like I can do that. Actually, I'm excited about doing that. I'm going to get better at that. Okay, so speaking of getting better, as we went through this study, we looked to see if the changes that we were making were actually making a difference. So one of the things that we found is that in both the earlier versions and the later versions, we were having a little over 95% of learners report that they were engaged in all 4 hours. So that is a really hard number to budge upward. So we didn't expect a lot of movement. We didn't get a lot of movement. But where we did see a difference, and I think this is probably much more a difficult metric and probably much more important, is will they use it? So in the earlier iterations, we got about 88% of people saying they saw themselves using what they learned in the future. We moved that up to about 92% in the later version, which we were really pleased with, right? It's only 4 percentage points, but as most facilitators know, it's capturing those more cynical or disengaged learners that's particularly hard. So those 4%, they were really hard earned. Okay, so again, if you look back at what we did here, a big part of this was about raising awareness, not only intellectually, but also that emotional buy-in. All right, and then giving people concrete steps that they can take to improve their EQ in real life situations. And certainly it is not easy, but emotional intelligence, that is often the difference between a place that is toxic and disjointed and one that is productive and effective, where you actually want to spend your time. Okay, so speaking of time, thank you for yours. And if you're interested in finding out more about this development program that I've been describing here, it is called Agile EQ. So thanks so much for your time.